Something unexpected just happened in the AI world. And if you blinked, you might have missed it. Google quietly dropped a model update that didn't just move the needle, it shattered it. We're talking about a jump in reasoning performance so large that even the people who follow this space closely had to do a double take. This isn't a minor patch or a marketing refresh. This is Google showing up with something genuinely different, and the timing couldn't be more interesting. To put it in perspective, imagine a student who scored a 31 out of 100 on one of the hardest tests in AI research, and then the very next version of that same student walks in and scores a 77. Same test, same conditions. That's not gradual improvement. That's a leap. And that's exactly what Google's Gemini 3.1 Pro just pulled off on the ARC AGI 2 benchmark, one of the most respected measures of real reasoning ability in artificial intelligence today. But raw benchmark numbers only tell part of the story. What makes this release genuinely exciting isn't just that the scores went up, it's why they went up, what changed under the hood, and what it means for developers, businesses, and everyday people who use AI tools. Because the improvements Google made here aren't just about being better at trivia or pattern matching. They're about making AI smarter in ways that actually matter. Coding, problem solving, handling complex multi-step tasks, empowering the next generation of AI agents that can work autonomously on your behalf. In this video, we're going to break all of it down. We'll look at exactly what's new in Gemini 3.1 Pro, how it stacks up against the competition, who can use it right now, and why this moment might be more significant than most people realize. So if you want to actually understand what's happening at the frontier of AI, not just the headlines, but the substance behind them, you're in the right place. And if you find this kind of content useful, go ahead and hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss what we cover next. We break down the biggest moves in AI and technology every week in a way that actually makes sense. So whether you're a developer, a business owner, or just someone trying to stay informed in a world that's moving incredibly fast, this channel is built for you. Share this video with someone who needs to know about this, because trust me, this one is worth talking about. Before we get into what makes Gemini 3.1 Pro so impressive, it helps to take a step back and understand where this model is coming from, because context matters a lot here. Google has been on an absolute sprint over the last few months. Gemini 3 Pro launched in November 2025, followed by the Flash variant in December, and then DeepThink shortly after. That's multiple major model releases in the span of just a few weeks, which tells you everything about the pace Google is operating at right now. This is not a company that's sitting back and watching the AI race from the sidelines. They're deep in it. Now, Gemini 3.1 Pro was announced on February 19th, 2026, and it's currently available in preview, meaning it's out in the world, developers can get their hands on it, but it hasn't hit full general availability just yet. And the naming convention here is actually worth paying attention to, because Google hasn't really done the .1 update style before. They used to jump straight to major version bumps or add suffixes like Ultra or DeepThink. Going to 3.1 signals something intentional. It tells us that Google is planning to iterate more frequently, more transparently, and more incrementally. Think of it like software versioning. A .1 update means meaningful progress, but also means there's more coming, and probably sooner than you'd expect. What's important to understand about 3.1 Pro specifically is what it was built on and what it was built for. This isn't a ground-up rebuild. It's a targeted, deliberate upgrade to Gemini 3 Pro's existing architecture, with the engineering focus pointed squarely at one thing: reasoning. Google looked at where the model was falling short, where the competition was pulling ahead, and where the real-world demands of developers and enterprises were going, and they engineered improvements with precision. That kind of focused development is actually harder than it sounds, because improving one capability in a large language model without degrading others is a genuinely difficult technical challenge. It's also worth noting that Gemini 3 Pro was already no slouch. Even before this update, it was sitting comfortably among the top-tier models in the world. So when we talk about the improvements in 3.1, we're not talking about fixing a broken model. We're talking about taking something that was already excellent and making it significantly more capable in the areas that matter most for where AI is headed next. And that distinction is important because it means Google isn't playing catch-up here. They're pushing forward. So now that you have a sense of where this model came from and why it exists, let's get into the part that actually made people pay attention: what Gemini 3.1 Pro can now do that it couldn't do before. Let's start with the number that stopped people in their tracks, because it really is that striking. On the ARC AGI 2 benchmark, which is widely considered one of the most honest and difficult tests of genuine reasoning ability in AI, Gemini 3 Pro scored 31.1%. Not bad, but not extraordinary either. Then Gemini 3.1 Pro walks in and scores 77.1%. That is not a rounding error. That is not a lucky result on an easier version of the test. That is a 46 percentage point jump on the same benchmark under the same conditions, and it happened in a single model update. To put that in even sharper perspective, Google's own Gemini 3 Deep Think, which was specifically designed and marketed around advanced reasoning, only scored 45.1% on that same test. Gemini 3.1 Pro didn't just beat it, it lapped it. And that tells you something really important about just how significant the engineering work behind this release actually was. So what changed? At the core of it, Google took the upgraded intelligence engine that was powering Deep Think, the specialized reasoning system that was previously only available in that premium, compute-heavy mode, and they built it directly into the foundation of 3.1 Pro. So instead of reasoning being this separate, expensive mode you had to opt into, it's now woven into how the model thinks by default. That's a fundamental shift in how the model approaches problems, and it shows up everywhere, not just on benchmarks, but in real-world tasks that require the model to plan, reflect, and work through complexity step by step, rather than just pattern matching its way to an answer. The second major area of improvement is in software engineering and agentic capabilities, and this one is arguably even more important for where AI is actually heading. Gemini 3.1 Pro shows meaningfully better performance on complex coding tasks, not just writing clean boilerplate, but understanding large code bases, debugging multi-layered problems, and generating solutions that actually work in production environments. If you're a developer, that distinction matters enormously because there's a big difference between an AI that can write a function and an AI that can reason about an entire system. And 3.1 Pro is clearly moving toward the latter. On the agentic side, this is where things get really interesting. Google has been very deliberate in saying that 3.1 Pro was built with ambitious agentic workflows in mind. What that means in practice is that this model is designed to not just answer questions, but to take sequences of actions, make decisions across multiple steps, and operate with a degree of autonomy that goes well beyond a typical chatbot interaction. We're talking about AI that can handle complex finance tasks, work through multi-step spreadsheet operations, manage code repositories, and coordinate across tools and data sources, all with far less hand-holding than previous models required. That's not a small thing. That is the direction the entire industry is moving, and Google is now one of the leaders pushing it forward. Then there's the efficiency story, which doesn't get as much attention, but is critically important for anyone building with this model. Google introduced a new medium thinking level parameter in 3.1 Pro, which sits between the lighter and heavier reasoning modes. What this means is that developers now have much finer control over the trade-off between cost, performance, and speed. You don't have to choose between a fast, cheap model and a slow, expensive one. You can tune it to exactly what your application needs. For businesses building AI-powered products at scale, that kind of flexibility is genuinely valuable, and it shows that Google is thinking seriously about real-world deployment, not just benchmark performance. And finally, it's worth mentioning what the model can handle in terms of raw capability, because the scope here is remarkable. Gemini 3.1 Pro supports text, audio, images, video, PDFs, and entire code repositories, all within a context window of 1 million tokens. That's an enormous amount of information the model can hold and reason over in a single session. And with up to 64,000 tokens of output, it can produce responses, documents, and code at a scale that opens up use cases that simply weren't possible before. Put all of that together, the reasoning leap, the agentic focus, the efficiency controls, and the multimodal breadth, and you start to see why this release landed differently than most. This isn't one improvement. It's several meaningful ones hitting at the same time, and they all point in the same direction. Now, none of this exists in a vacuum. The AI landscape in early 2026 is arguably the most competitive it has ever been, with Google, OpenAI, and Anthropic all pushing hard and releasing major models within weeks of each other. So the natural question is, where does Gemini 3.1 Pro actually stand when you line it up against the best that the competition has to offer? And the honest answer is that it's a genuinely impressive picture for Google, with a few important nuances worth understanding. When you look at the broad benchmark landscape, Gemini 3.1 Pro outperforms Anthropic's Claude Opus 4.6 and Sonnet 4.6 on a majority of tests, and it beats OpenAI's GPT 5.2 and GPT 5.3 codecs across most of the standard evaluation suite as well. That's a remarkable position to be in, especially given that both Anthropic and OpenAI have been considered the benchmark setters in this space for quite some time. The fact that Google can now walk into that comparison and come out ahead on most metrics is a genuine statement about how far their models have come and how seriously they've been investing in the underlying research and engineering to get there. But here's where the nuance matters, and it's worth being honest about rather than glossing over. Claude Opus 4.6 still leads on humanity's last exam, which is one of the most respected tests of deep academic and expert-level knowledge across dozens of disciplines. It also holds the edge on SWE Bench Verified, which is a rigorous real-world coding benchmark that measures how well a model can actually fix bugs in genuine open-source repositories. Not toy examples, but real code with real complexity. And on SWE Pro, the most demanding version of that coding evaluation, GPT 5.3 Codex still holds the top spot. So the picture isn't one of total dominance. It's one of a very tight, fiercely competitive race where different models lead on different things. What that actually tells you, if you step back and think about it, is that we are in an extraordinary moment in AI development where there is genuinely no single best model for everything. The right choice depends on what you're building, what tasks matter most to you, and what trade-offs you're willing to make between speed, cost, and capability. A developer who lives in coding workflows might still reach for GPT 5.3 Codex for certain tasks. A researcher working with dense academic material might still find Claude Opus 4.6 sharper for that specific use case. But for a general-purpose powerhouse that performs at the highest level across the widest range of tasks, reasoning, multimodal understanding, agentic workflows, long context, and efficient deployment, Gemini 3.1 Pro has absolutely earned its place at the top of that conversation. And there's one more dimension to this competitive picture that often gets overlooked when people focus purely on benchmarks, and that's ecosystem reach. Google has something that neither OpenAI nor Anthropic can match at the same scale. An existing product footprint that spans billions of users and some of the most widely used software on the planet. Gemini 3.1 Pro isn't just a model that researchers and developers can access through an API. It's the engine that powers tools people are already using every single day. That kind of reach changes the competitive equation in ways that raw benchmark scores simply can't capture. And it's a huge part of why this release matters beyond just the technical achievements. One of the things that often gets lost in the excitement around a major AI release is the practical question that most people actually care about. Okay, but can I use it? And with Gemini 3.1 Pro, the answer is a pretty resounding yes, across a surprisingly wide range of entry points. Google has clearly put serious thought into distribution here, because this model isn't locked behind a single product or a single audience. Whether you're a casual user, a developer, an enterprise, or somewhere in between, there's a path to getting your hands on this. For everyday consumers, Gemini 3.1 Pro is rolling out through the Gemini app, which is available on both mobile and desktop. If you're subscribed to Google AI Pro or Google AI Ultra, you're going to have access to this model directly in the interface you're probably already using. And it's also coming to Notebook LM, which is Google's research and note-taking tool that has quietly built an incredibly loyal user base over the past year. For people who use Notebook LM to process documents, synthesize research, and work through complex reading, getting access to 3.1 Pro's enhanced reasoning inside that tool is a genuinely significant upgrade to an already powerful product. For developers, the access points are even broader. Gemini 3.1 Pro is available through the Gemini API, which means you can start building with it right now through Google AI Studio, Google's web-based environment for prototyping and testing model integrations. It's also accessible via the Gemini CLI for developers who prefer working in the terminal, and it's integrated into Android Studio and Google Anti-Gravity for those building mobile and cloud-native applications respectively. What's notable here is how low Google has kept the barrier to entry for developers who want to experiment. AI Studio in particular makes it remarkably easy to test the model, tune parameters like that new medium thinking level, and start building without having to spin up any infrastructure. That accessibility matters because it means the developer community can start exploring what 3.1 Pro is capable of immediately, which tends to accelerate adoption and surface use cases that even Google's own teams haven't anticipated. For enterprises, the primary home is Vertex AI, Google's fully managed machine learning platform that gives large organizations the security, compliance, and scalability controls they need to deploy AI in production environments. Gemini Enterprise subscribers also get access through Google's business tier offerings, which include the governance and data handling features that regulated industries require before they can seriously consider putting a model like this into their workflows. And for enterprises that are already deep in Microsoft's ecosystem, there's actually a particularly interesting angle here. Gemini 3.1 Pro is accessible through GitHub Copilot, Visual Studio, and VS Code as well. That's a meaningful partnership that effectively puts Google's most capable model inside the development environments that millions of professional developers around the world are already working in every single day. And when you zoom out and look at the scale of what Google is operating at here, the numbers are genuinely staggering. The Gemini app now has over 750 million monthly active users. The API is processing more than 10 billion tokens per minute. Those aren't vanity metrics. They represent real infrastructure, real adoption, and a real feedback loop that helps Google understand how people are actually using these models at a scale that very few organizations in the world can match. It means that when Google ships an improvement like 3.1 Pro, the impact isn't just felt in research labs or startup demos. It ripples out across an ecosystem that is already woven into how hundreds of millions of people work, learn, and build things every single day. And that combination of cutting-edge capability with massive, ready-made distribution is ultimately what makes this release land differently than it might if it came from a smaller player. Step back for a moment and think about the timeline we're living through right now. Gemini 3 Pro launched in November 2025. Flash came in December. DeepThink followed shortly after. And now, in February 2026, we have 3.1 Pro, a model that in several key areas outperforms everything that came before it, including models that were themselves considered state-of-the-art just weeks ago. That's not a product roadmap. That's a velocity. And it tells you something profound about the moment we're actually in, because the pace of progress in AI right now isn't just fast. It's accelerating in ways that are genuinely difficult to keep up with even if you follow this space closely. What makes Gemini 3.1 Pro particularly significant as a signal for the future isn't just what it can do today. It's what it reveals about where Google is pointing. Everything about this release, from the reasoning improvements to the agentic capabilities to the efficiency controls, points in one clear direction: AI that doesn't just respond but acts. The industry has spent the last few years building models that are extraordinarily good at answering questions and generating content. That was phase one. What's coming next? And what 3.1 Pro is very deliberately designed to participate in is AI that can take on complex, multi-step tasks autonomously, operate across tools and systems, make decisions with context and judgment, and ultimately function less like a very smart search engine and more like a capable, independent collaborator. That shift is enormous, and it has implications that stretch far beyond any single benchmark score. Think about what that means in practical terms for the way people work. Right now, using AI in a professional context still requires a lot of active management. You prompt it, you review the output, you correct it, you prompt again. It's a collaborative loop, but a fairly labor-intensive one. What Agentic AI promises, and what Gemini 3.1 Pro is beginning to genuinely deliver on, is a model that you can hand a complex goal to and trust it to work through the steps required to get there without needing constant guidance. That's not science fiction anymore. It's the direction the technology is clearly and rapidly moving toward. And 3.1 Pro represents one of the most significant steps in that direction that we've seen from any major lab. For developers and businesses, this has enormous implications for what's actually buildable right now. The combination of 3.1 Pro's reasoning capability, its 1 million token context window, its multimodal understanding, and its agentic design means that the class of problems you can realistically solve with AI has expanded significantly with this single release. Workflows that previously required custom pipelines, multiple models, and extensive human oversight are increasingly within reach of a single, well-prompted model working through a task end-to-end. That lowers the cost of building intelligent systems. It raises the ceiling on what those systems can accomplish, and it opens the door for a wave of applications that simply weren't feasible before. And then there's the broader competitive dimension, because what happens at the frontier of AI research doesn't stay at the frontier for long. The improvements Google has made in 3.1 Pro will influence how the field thinks about reasoning, about agentic design, about the relationship between compute efficiency and capability. OpenAI and Anthropic will respond. Google will respond to their responses. The feedback loop between these organizations is one of the most powerful engines of technological progress we have ever seen operating in real time. And every release like this one raises the baseline for what the entire field considers possible. That's good for everyone. For developers who get better tools, for businesses who get more capable AI, and for users who get products that are genuinely smarter and more useful with every passing month. The naming choice of 3.1 might seem like a small detail, but it's worth sitting with for a moment. Google didn't call this Gemini 4. They called it 3.1, and that's deliberate. It signals that this is the beginning of a new approach to iteration, more frequent, more targeted, more transparent about where progress is being made and why. It suggests that rather than waiting for a massive generational leap to ship something, Google intends to move continuously, pushing meaningful improvements out into the world as soon as they're ready. In a landscape where the competition is doing the same thing, that cadence matters enormously. Because in a race where everyone is moving fast, the winner isn't necessarily the one who takes the biggest single step. It's the one who keeps moving most consistently and most intelligently over time. And right now, with Gemini 3.1 Pro, Google is making a very clear statement that they intend to be exactly that. So let's bring it all together because we've covered a lot of ground in this video, and it's worth taking a moment to crystallize what actually matters here. Gemini 3.1 Pro is not just another model update with a slightly higher number attached to it. It represents three things happening simultaneously that, when you combine them, make this release genuinely significant. First, a reasoning leap that is unlike anything we've seen in a single model iteration, jumping from 31% to 77% on one of the hardest AI benchmarks in existence is not incremental progress. It's a category shift. Second, a deliberate and serious commitment to agentic AI, building a model that isn't just smarter at answering questions, but more capable of actually doing things autonomously in the real world. And third, a distribution advantage that no benchmark can fully capture, putting that capability into the hands of developers, enterprises, and hundreds of millions of everyday users through an ecosystem that is already embedded in how the world works. What this moment really asks us to consider is a question that's becoming harder and harder to dodge. Is Google catching up to OpenAI and Anthropic, or has already passed them? A year ago, that question would have felt almost rhetorical. The assumption was that Google was playing from behind. But right now, in February 2026, with Gemini 3.1 Pro sitting at the top of most major benchmarks and backed by an infrastructure and user base that dwarfs the competition, that assumption deserves to be seriously reconsidered. The answer probably isn't a clean yes or no. The honest truth is that the race is closer, more dynamic, and more genuinely uncertain than it has ever been. And that uncertainty is actually one of the most exciting things about this moment, because it means the best AI tools we'll ever have are almost certainly still ahead of us. We'd love to know where you land on this. Do you think Google has genuinely taken a lead? Or do you think OpenAI and Anthropic still have the edge where it counts? Drop your take in the comments. We read every single one, and some of the most interesting conversations we have happen right there. If this video gave you a clearer picture of what Gemini 3.1 Pro actually is and why it matters, the best thing you can do is hit that like button. It genuinely helps this kind of in-depth content reach more people who are trying to make sense of this space. And if you're not subscribed yet, now is a great time because we're going to be covering every major move in AI as it happens with the same level of depth and honesty you got in this video. The next few months in this industry are going to be fascinating, and you don't want me catching up after the fact. We'll see you in the next one.